So, to a certain extent, I see this radicalization as a feature of a settler colonial unit, and I see parallels between what happened with whites in South Africa in the years before the end of Apartheid, where you saw increasing radicalization, increasing move to the right. You saw groups like the Africana resistance movement of Eugene Terre Blanche, just gaining tens of thousands of new members. You saw support moving from the National Party to the even more far-right Conservative Party. And so people always said, well, you may talk about a non-racial South Africa with one person, one vote, but this is unrealistic because whites will never accept it. And I think you see similar parallels now in Israel with increasing religiosity, radicalization. People react to it the same way. But I think after the ideological break, after the power shift, a lot of that dissipates. Of course, I don't have a crystal ball, but I think that that's driving a lot of the violence. I mean, the pogroms by the settlers is driven by this ideology. But the settlers themselves are not an independent force. They are dependent on the Israeli state, and the Israeli state is dependent on external support. So once you break the whole system, I think all of that dissipates. I'm giving you this long answer to say is I'm not convinced that the religious radicalism is by itself enough of a factor to sustain the situation on the ground. And therefore it's not insurmountable, which I think is an important point to make. Does that make any sense? Okay.
These days, it seems like there is some pressure from the international community to do something. And for that reason, we heard that Benjamin Netanyahu tried to offer some kind of a settlement. How do you see this idea? I mean, his ideas about not permanent.
An interim agreement, long-term
something like that.
Yeah.
You think the international community can buy this again and again and again?
This is a question about the so-called peace process and what role it has played in the past 20 years. And I think it has played for the Israelis the role of buying time. That Israel was always headed for the cliff in terms of being, ideologically at the dead end, or I'm mixing metaphors furiously here, over a cliff and into a dead end. They could see now you have the demographic shift taking place, that Palestinians are once again the numerical majority in historic Palestine from the river to the sea. And they saw all that coming, but they couldn't change course. So the only strategy was to buy time through the peace process. As former Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir said back in the early days of the peace process, after he left office, he said, we would have continued the negotiations for 10 years while, and in the meantime, we would have 500,000 settlers in the West Bank. Well, that's exactly what Israel did. For the so-called international community, I use the term so-called a lot because I think we should always question these terms. International community, when it's used casually in the media, when you analyze it, means the United States and its sidekicks. It doesn't mean the international community. One of its literal sidekicks is Canada. We know you're up here. Even though you don't think we forget about Canada. I love Canada, I really do. I'm just kidding. In fact, all Americans, except for that 30% I talked about earlier, constantly say they want to move to Canada. You know that we know that you wouldn't have us, though. But if you think about the role that the peace process has played for these countries, the so-called international community, it has been really a fig leaf. It's been a way to get off the hook and to evade responsibility. A private example of that is the Goldstone report. Here you had a UN Commission report by an impeccable group of international officials headed by Judge Richard Goldstone, the former head of the Special Tribunal on Yugoslavia, former judge of the South African Supreme Court, a man who played an important role in the transition after apartheid, a self-described Jew and supporter of Israel, who conducted this report that you can read online, or better still buy the book, because recently an edited version came out in which I have an essay edited by Phil Weiss and Adam Horowitz and Lizzie Ratner, with some fantastic commentaries from other people. But here you have this report that presents clear, transparent evidence of war crimes and crimes against humanity committed in Gaza by Israel, and also looks at Palestinian actions. It's all laid out there. And the United States and the other countries that have opposed any action on the Goldstone report have justified it by saying, well, you know, this would get in the way of the peace process. Well, what peace process? So, using a dead peace process as a way to avoid the responsibility of implementing international law, holding Israel to account. Look at the United States a few weeks ago, vetoed yet another UN Security Council resolution condemning Israeli settlement. And this was a very mild resolution. I was against introducing it, not that I have any weight on the matter, because I feel like it dilutes the previous resolutions if it had passed. It's so weak. But yet the US vetoed it. And the excuse is, well, this would get in the way of the peace process. So it's become this excuse, and also for politicians personally, who want to avoid difficult questions. If you go to them and say, why aren't you doing anything about what's going on? Why aren't you holding Israel accountable? They can say, oh, well, it's very sad, but we really support the peace process because we all love peace and we all want there to be peace. So, under the guise of this peace process, horrors have happened, real horrors, massacres, ethnic cleansing, deportation, anything. The normalization of extrajudicial executions. Israel, back when Israel started openly carrying out extrajudicial executions using helicopters and drones and death squads dressed up as Arabs and all that, the world used to pretend, the international community used to pretend to be horrified. Now they do it themselves in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, in Yemen, where it's become normal. So this is the Israelification also of our own societies. You see this a great deal in Canada with the securitization policies as well. So all of this happened under the guise of the peace process. The problem now is this game has run its course. So this is what surprised Netanyahu, in that, he was very confident and jaunty. We go to Washington and we say, yes, we love peace. And why don't the Palestinians come and negotiate with us? We beg them to come and negotiate. You don't like what we do? Come and negotiate. Nobody buys this anymore. Just the other day there was a report in the Haaretz about Angela Merkel, the German chancellor, one of the most pro-Israel politicians in Europe, unquestioningly pro-Israel politicians, who basically hung up on the phone on Netanyahu and basically told him in not quite as many words that he's a liar, because he told her, oh, we're going to have this new peace plan. So all this is an effort to play the same old game, and it's come to an end. So nobody is going to buy Netanyahu's talk of a long-term, interim, something, Palestinian state with provisional, I don't know what. This is nonsense. You will hear politicians saying, oh yes, well we should, don't buy it from them and don't let them get away with it. We now have to focus not on what the men in suits do, but what the men in uniforms are doing on the ground. That has to be the standard by which we judge what is going on. And we also must bring an end to this double standard where, you know, I hope we would all support the Libyan people trying to rid themselves of Colonel Gaddafi and his regime. But, you know, amazing how fast they start saying the ICC, the International Criminal Court, like that, they opened an investigation into Libya. And the Gold Star report?
No.
So if truth is anti-Semitic, what do we do?
Well, I think that
Like the new anti-Semitism is what the BDS is about, isn't it?
yes, I mean,
What is our new narrative? What is the Palestinian narrative, or our narrative for human justice?
I think it's to explain very clearly what the goals are, to, you know, look at the
No, we
Palestinian...
have Goldstone.
How do I ask a question? Is the
Yeah,
microphone right there? Just walk towards it. Just walk to Okay. Perhaps I should walk around.
Here's the difference.
It needs a period to promote more economical warfare.
Here's the difference, though. Israel has relied on those traditional defenses. Military, which now is not, you know, they themselves have recognized a famous report that came out about a year ago from the Reut Institute that said the main threat to Israel is what they call delegitimization, a loss of standing in the eyes of the world, and not military. And we have, you know, invested all of our efforts into building up military defenses. Well, military defenses do you no good against the movement for freedom and liberation. Look at Libya. Look at the world reaction to Colonel Gaddafi using tanks and artillery and anti-aircraft guns against people struggling for freedom. What's Israel going to do if 1 million Palestinians start marching? Well, we've seen in the past it will kill them. But how many can it kill before the noose really starts to tighten? And we see the noose tightening. Now, we haven't seen, you know, many Western politicians standing up courageously and say the Goldstone report must be implemented and those allegations must be investigated, those responsible brought to trial. But we have seen the judicial system starting to unfreeze. So last year, for example, for the first time ever, a magistrate's court in the UK issued an arrest warrant for Tzipi Livni.
It was shut down.
It was shut down, yes. What happened? Well, the magistrate withdrew it because it turned out she wasn't in the country.
But the Israeli lobbyist pressure is all over the whole world.
No, let's be very clear. Let's not disempower ourselves by saying the Israel lobby is all powerful. It's powerful, but it's not all powerful. Okay? So, a magistrate issued an arrest warrant. Tzipi Livni wasn't arrested, but now Tzipi Livni has to think every time she gets on an airplane. She recently canceled a trip to South Africa because of the risk of arrest. You have several other examples in the past year of top Israeli officials, including a deputy prime minister and several generals, who have canceled trips to Europe, Spain, the Netherlands, other countries, the UK, because of fear of arrest. Because those governments could not guarantee that independent judiciaries would not implement the law and arrest them. What has the response from the UK government and other governments been? The UK government, their response was to promise first the Labour government and now the Conservative government, we will change the law to take away the independence of the judiciary in this area in order to stack the system in favor of Israeli war criminals. Right? But now, if they want to change the law in that way, they're going to have a fight on their hands. There's a movement that is going to stand up to that. And it's not a foregone conclusion that they can win. So this is the battle that we have to be prepared to fight. And not disempower ourselves by saying, well, they can't do anything. After Lebanon 2006, the noose started to tighten. After